Native Americans of Reddit, what are you or your tribe's ghost stories, legends, or supernatural occurrences? Hey guys, it's Em. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Story 1. I'm Cherokee, so technically Native American speaker. Very technical. However, that has nothing to do with what I'm going to talk about. That was just obligatory. Maybe it's not appropriate, but maybe it is for this Reddit question. I don't know for sure. I'm Hawaiian, living on the island of Kauai. I'm sorry if my pronunciation isn't right. Please let me know in the comments how I should say this. Back to the story. I've met people in here who've said Hawaiians are Native American because America controls Hawaii. Sure, buddy. Anyway, there's a lot of supernatural and myth here in Hawaii that I thought I might share a bit of. At least the most prevalent kind that I've heard of. Night marchers, ghostly ancient Hawaiian warriors. You'll hear drums and see torches when they're near. You can't look at them, and you should lie on the ground in respect. They'll kill you otherwise. You can still die even if you follow the recommendations. You're most likely to live if you're of Hawaiian descent. If a ghost warrior is a relative, he can call upon the night marchers to spare a descendant's life and or show the absolute respect. The mermaid of Wailua River. She's very much like a siren of sorts. Wailua River is the biggest, in terms of width, on Kauai. She swims in that river and does what one would expect a siren to do. White Man of Waimea Canyon. Basically a small powder white creature that at night stalks people. The only story I've heard of it involved the creature jumping on a guy's back and attacking him. Some sort of night creature I forgot the name of. I think it was a sort of one-eyed beast, but I'm not sure. Mythology story involved a hunter who stayed out too late, so he decided to camp. He sets up a fire and sees the creature across from him. The monster just watches him from across the campfire. This particular monster doesn't like light. The hunter had to sit there and keep the flame lit until morning. When the sun began to rise, the monster left. General ghosts of people that haunt heiaus and grave sites. Heiaus are sacred ancient Hawaiian lands that people cannot tread upon. This is a real rule here. Legends ranging from bad luck, being haunted, and more can happen if one treads on sacred land, especially without respect and Hawaiian descent. My uncle once parked by a river and hotel with a courtyard that was built upon an ancient gravesite. On that courtyard was a tree. My uncle said he saw people in that tree staring back at him. Anyway, those are just stories at the top of my head. There is a ton of Hawaiian mythology, and I'm glad I was able to share some of that, even if this wasn't exactly a Native American story. Someone commented, "No, thanks for sharing." Hawaiians are pretty much considered Native American, or at least Native Pacific Islander. These were some really cool stories, so thanks OP for sharing. One thing I always found interesting was how many traits, monsters, or just other components that a lot of myths from various countries had in common, before there was any way to share these stories. So, like that siren from this story is very reminiscent of sirens from ancient Greek mythology. And both of these stories probably existed before they were communicated. So either it means two people on opposite sides of the world had the same idea, or something like this really did or does exist. Story 2. Here's a non-scary legend from the Osage. The story of the medicine spider. Long ago, when the people were young, the chiefs of the many clans of the Osage sought out different animals to become symbols of their people, to impart wisdom and strength to them. The chief of the isolated earth, troubled because he has yet to find such an animal, went out hunting for food and to search for his people's symbol. After he'd been hunting for some time, he came across the hoofprint of a massive stag. "Ah," he said, "Grandfather dear, reveal yourself to me, so that you may bring your strength to my people." And he began to track the stag so that he could take it as a symbol. For many hours he tracked the stag, and gradually the tracks became fresher as he started to catch up. However, he was so focused on following the tracks of the stag that he did not lift his eyes from the ground, and did not notice that his path would lead him directly into a spider's web. The web was massive and strong, and the chief was caught just enough to impede his passage for a moment. In anger, he struck at the spider, but it dodged his blow and scurried out of reach, before proceeding to scold him. "Grandson," said the spider, "why do you strike at me when it is your own carelessness that has caused you to walk into my web? What are you so preoccupied with that you cannot watch where you are going? Why do you walk as a blind man?" The chief of the isolated earth suddenly felt foolish, but felt compelled to answer the spider. "I was following the tracks of a great stag, so that it can be a symbol of my clan and bring strength to our people." The spider replied that it could be such a symbol, and the chief scoffed at it. "You are such a small, weak thing. How could you bring strength to my people? The spider answered, Where I am, I build my home. And where I build my home, all things come to it. Should your people learn this patience, they shall become strong indeed. The chief saw the wisdom of this and went home satisfied. And so the medicine spider became a symbol for the isolated earth and one of the symbols of the Osage people. Traditionally, the medicine spider is depicted as a stylized black widow. Somebody commented, Sweet, I have Osage in me myself and I enjoyed this story. Thanks for sharing. This is honestly a great story that also contains an important message about sometimes realizing that we have to be cognizant of what we have and not always what we desire. I love folklore and tales like these that morals simply beyond be a good person or don't steal, but instead, morals that make you really reflect on your behavior. Story 3. I come from the Lumbee tribe, which has a lot of controversy to begin with. But I'll share a family story. My great-grandmother was supposedly the local witch doctor in her town for a majority of her life. Growing up, I always thought these sort of stories were total BS and just my dad messing with me. He and his family would always say how I was her namesake, and even if I didn't want to accept it, we had some weird synchronicities in our family and assumed it was because of her. The day she passed away, my dad was out in his garden when he immediately stood up and thought he heard her screaming from afar. At the time, he lived in a separate state from her, but the screaming sounded like her voice and it really freaked him out. He goes inside the house to call and check on her when suddenly the phone rings. It's his mother telling him how his grandmother had just passed away and he needs to head home. Another weird thing in our family is that whenever I have a dream with my dad in it, even if he only appears for a brief second, without failure, he calls me the next day. Every goddamn time this man is in my dreams, I wake up and know that he'll be calling me sometime that day. Best part? He says the same thing happens when I appear in his dreams. Him and I aren't terribly close in the sense that I haven't seen him in person in 2 years, and we maybe chat on the phone once a month or so. Granted, it's nothing too spooky, but I always found it really interesting that his family and I have these minor happenings, and we usually just chalk it up to being Lumbee. Honestly, it's really cool that you not only have these experiences, but that you can also equate it to a part of your heritage. I think it's awesome that for some people, their heritage or ethnicity can either give them the idea that they are blessed with a gift, or maybe they just actually are gifted. Story 4. Mexican here. We have tribesmen too. We just built a bit of an empire. So I'll tell you the story of the Cherokee. These creeps are young children with the faces of old men, and not much is known about them. They live in the deserts and jungles of Mexico, and the legend goes that if you see one and follow it, you'll lose either 3 or 7 days. My grandfather always told me that if you lose 7 days to a Cherokee, they follow you home and they try their absolute best to drive you to insanity, depression, or suicide. If you lose 3 days, it means one of 2 things will happen. The first is that you'll go to war, where you will die a brutal but glorious death. The second is that you'll be the victim of a great tragedy, lose your life savings, break both legs, lose family, that sort of thing. If you turn your back on the Cherokee, it will transform into a great and terrible jaguar and you'll be devoured. To avoid this fate, you must back away from it, avoiding eye contact at all costs. For if you make eye contact, it will steal your soul. When you can no longer see it, you must pray and pray hard. I'm not quite sure how well this monster is known throughout Mexico, or if it's even told the same. But I know that this story has been in my family for generations. My grandfather's grandfather told him. My father's grandfather told him. My grandfather told me. My father will tell my son, and I'll tell my grandson. Yes, in that order. Old traditions. I pray we never ever see one of these monsters. Somebody commented, never thought an Aztec would come in here. Freaking awesome. Also, this story is creepy as frick. Story 5. I'm too late but worth a shot. Do Inuit count? I'm from northern Canada. Nunavut. There are shadow figures called Teranek, or the shadow people. It is believed that you can see them from the corner of your eyesight. When you see a Teranek, you would take another look, or you swore you saw something in a form of a shadow or a haze. I have heard that they are rather creepy, and they give you the feeling of being watched, or a slight anxiety of someone following you. Another legend is called Ijirete, translated to people who hide. Ijirete are entities that you would see in the barren Arctic and the far hills. The Ijire have the power to shapeshift into other creatures or people, really similar to the Navajo legend of Skinwalkers, although never harming Inuit. It is believed that the entities observe Inuit and follow them, but I have never heard Ijire harming Inuit. An Inuk elder explained that the Ijire can live human lives or imitate humans, or even marry other human beings, while pretending to be Inuit. Camping in the Arctic is creepy, and you would have that expectation that you would encounter entities, especially how the Arctic is so vast and empty. Someone commented, I love Inuit stories. I'm from southern Alberta, so I've heard a lot of those stories, but not northern Canadian ones. I love Inuit art as well. This is one where maybe we could use a scientific argument and say that the only reason people saw shadows was because the human mind does try to pick out shapes or faces in the dark. But it is also cool to think that maybe these shadow people are real. And if so, it's pretty amazing that they're non-violent, as I feel like all the stories I read have these creatures harming animals or humans. Story 6. Cherokee, and my family has always had supernatural things going on, though there are lots of cool scary stories to tell. One particular popped in my head when I read the question, Deer Woman. My stepmom always said she was in the deer clan. Because of this, she never ate any deer whatsoever. I never knew the reason why till after she became extremely ill. Because my dad tricked her into eating deer jerky one day, told me that anyone who ate deer in her clan usually gets a warning by getting sick. But if they continued eating deer, they would die. This is because the deer woman would come for them, because they had done wrong. She went further down the road of making me not eat any jerky for a while by saying, every year a person in her clan is eaten by the deer woman. This is at POWs, of course, when everyone goes home. You'll hear the next day that someone died or went missing, never to be found, is what she told me in between moments of dizziness. At around 7 or 8 at that time, and her being my stepmom, I thought I was gonna die because all I ate was deer jerky that day. Story 7. So I know we have the Apache Death Cave. That's actually real though, but it's a great read for people looking for ghost stories. I was told a story by my great-grandmother. A mountain spirit was angry about the way the white men had hurt the land by breaking the mountains and tainting the waters. So he came up with a plan. He pretended to be a white man and convinced people he'd found a mine. Every day he would appear to be growing richer and richer. Finally, the white men grew greedy and decided to take the mine for themselves, following the spirit into the mountain. Every day, men would try to follow the spirit into the mountains, but none ever returned. This continued every day because the white men cared more about the copper than the mountains, lands, and water. It's still happening even today. The spirit takes their body somewhere they can never return to the land they abused. Someone commented, Greenpeace's origin story is a lot darker than I thought it would be. Look, honestly, I can never get mad about stories where bad people get what they deserve. I looked up the cave and it says it's in Winslow, Arizona. After looking it up though, it seems that the story goes that it was actually a mass grave, because the Apache killed the Navajo in retaliation for stealing 3 of their girls and killing their village. If anyone else has any information about this place, please do drop it below, as it sounds honestly fascinating, and I want to make sure I'm saying the right thing. Story 8. I'm Metis, and an interesting fact that I learned recently was that out in the West, when they went on long buffalo hunts and someone died, it was necessary to bring them back to their home community. So let's just say that Grandpa Jean-Baptiste dies on the hunt. They would bury him in a shallow grave with a marker, and when the hunt was over, they would dig him up, put him under all the hides so the smell of dead Grandpa Jean-Baptiste wouldn't be too bad. And they would bring them back to their homeland and give him a proper burial. It was important to them that their dead came back home and were laid to rest with the rest of the family. A lot of them were very Catholic and firmly believed that the dead must be buried on sacred ground, or else their souls would wander restlessly. Apparently, European settlers and First Nations did not follow this practice. They would bury them where they died. Story 9. From an inland PNW reservation, we have stories of little people, stick Indians, and of course, Bigfoot. Little people are garden gnome-sized people that live in the hills and caves and pretty much live their own lives. I can't remember a whole lot of their story or lore. Stick Indians are spirits that either blue, green, or red light form. The former are considered good, and if you're lost, will lead you home to a familiar trail. The latter are evil and will lead you over deadfalls or cliffs and try to hurt you. Everyone knows the Bigfoot stories. The one thing about them that may be unique is that they communicate by beating sticks against trees and hitting rocks together. My favorite stories come from my Navajo friend about skinwalkers. Story 10. I haven't looked into this in years, but I was always told never to go into the woods at night, as that was when the spirits would roam around, especially in winter, as this was when a giant flying cannibal head would attack, especially people who did bad things. From the Great Lakes region in Canada, supposedly. I'll have to research it to see if it's actually true or something my mother came up with to terrify me, lol. Somebody commented, Wendigos are said to stalk the woods, and the Wendigo legends originated in your area, so there's a possibility that the cannibal head could possibly be a Wendigo. I first heard about Wendigos when I played Until Dawn, And oh boy did they freak me out. It's why I refuse to go in the woods at night, especially in the winter. Story 11. I'm Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, and Chippewa. When I was young, my mom would tell me and my siblings stories. One of them was about twisted, spiteful people who were knowledgeable about medicine, spiritual power, but they used it in a bad way. It was said that such people would turn into bears, or they're shapeshifters. We called them bear walkers, and they moved only at night. Weird Wolf Guy mentioned will-o-wisps, and his story is similar to mine. We were taught that these balls of light were the sign of a bear walker, and that if we saw one, we were supposed to run away as fast as we could. Story 12. Where I lived out in Arizona, there were always stories of the Skinwalker tribe, a group of Native Americans that have the power to turn into big and scary wolves. Some even have the power to turn into other animals. Somebody commented, "I've heard so many Skinwalker stories growing up." I remember a long time ago, they featured a story in Arizona Republic, the main newspaper in Phoenix, Arizona, about skinwalkers with a full-page illustration of how they pictured it would look. Talk about nightmare fuel. Story 13. A long time ago, there were people who lived around the Inuit. They were big and strong enough to tow multiple kajaks into the wind when it was blowing too hard for the Inuit to row. They disappeared before people came over from Europe. Looking at archaeological evidence, they were probably the last of the Dorset people, who the Thule people, the ancestors of modern Inuit, met as they traveled east across the Arctic. It's so interesting to me how different evolutions of humans were when it came to not only physical appearances, but also some genetic differences like strength and immunity to particular diseases. Now with how many people have had kids and how many generations down the line we are, our DNA is fundamentally so similar that sometimes it feels like we've just lost those differences. I do wonder how strong these people really were though, and what did wipe them out. Story 14. There's a pair of legs that always want to race at night. If you're out on the res after nightfall, you're bound to run into the bodiless legs that run into the roads around the res. Apparently, it will try and trip you to ensure it wins. There are a few others that go around that I'm pretty sure started as someone's grandma trying to scare kids from doing stuff. Somebody commented, the pair of legs sound like a jerk head. Story 15. Walking Sam is a spirit that supposedly haunts the res and coaxes children to harm or kill themselves. TBH kinda sounds like a ripoff of Slenderman. Somebody commented, an externalization of a real fear. Children on the res have a much higher rate of suicide. So invent a monster to explain why. The truth is poverty, neglect, abuse, drugs, and despair. A monster you could ward away, but systemic social problems are not so easily frightened away. Story 16. My mom used to say yellow butterflies were good luck. Not sure if she just made that up though, lol. That and something about owls being bad. Oh yeah. Also, don't listen if you hear your name from something or somewhere unknown, even if it sounds like someone you know, especially when it's somewhere your name shouldn't be called from. I don't know about the thing about the butterflies or owls, but I do know about the name thing. Unless you specifically know who is calling you and they entered with you, do not respond and stay silent. It's best that they don't know where you are, so that way at least you have some chance of escaping. Story 17. A hoot owl will visit and within a few days a family member will pass away. This happened for every family member I know of that has passed. I've heard and seen the owl twice in my life. Story 18. I'm Navajo and we used to have monsters, but the monster hunter twins killed them all. Now only the witches and their Yendalushi skin walking remains. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.